Hey, how's it going, beautiful people? Welcome back to the African Comic Guy, and today we actually get to talk about Superman and specifically Superman Legacy, a movie coming out in a few years from the new DCU. But before that, we are actually going to just talk about Superman just a little bit, give you guys some context, give you guys some history, and at the same time, we're going to go through some appreciation of Superman. I mean, he is the world's greatest superhero on both Marvel and DC. I bet you most people around the world know Superman way before they knew Iron Man. Not because he's more important than Iron Man, but because Superman has just been around and more um, visible and more famous, more popular for a very, very long time. So we're about to talk about him. But before we do that, like always, let's cue the intro. his his origin stories have been the same from the beginning, from the start of Superman comics in 1938 to now. You know, the backstory of Superman is what? Born on Krypton, right, on Krypton, and as a baby, you know, he was born into a planet that was actually just about to die. Now, his dad, his father, Jor-El, realized this. Being a scientist himself, realized that, you know what, our planet is doomed. So him and the mom, they decided, you know what, we have to send our baby, our child, who's merely weeks old, we have to send him to a planet and hope that the planet we're sending him to receives him well. So I think I'm not a parent, but you could just imagine being a parent, having a newborn, and deciding to send this newborn. I mean, it's one thing when you send the newborn to your relatives, right? You can't raise them, you guys raise them. You're sending this kid across the universe, and you're just hoping that wherever he lands, he's raised by good people. He grows up to be an incredible person. And that's what happens. He lands in Kansas, of all places, the Midwest, and is essentially adopted by parents, Martha Kent and Jonathan Kent. And they raise Superman, name him Clark Kent, right? That's his Earth name. His Krypton name is Kal-El, right? From his father Jor-El, right? And this kid grows up with values, incredible values. He learns from his parents the value of not only humility, he learns what it means to be human, even though he is definitely not human. As he grows up, he realizes he has powers because his powers are activated by the sun. So as he grows, he starts realizing, wait a minute, I have abilities, but he doesn't understand exactly who he is. He just realizes, wait a minute, I'm strong. I can lift a tractor. You know, his parents realize this, so they start shielding him because they know he's different. They don't tell him yet that he's different. So he's going through these changes as we grow up as kids. You know, as a boy, you know, you grow up, certain things start happening. Your voice gets deeper. All these things that they tell you you're going to experience, he's experiencing other things on a different level, right? He gets to a point he can see through everything. He has X-ray vision. He gets to another point he can levitate. He can fly. He gets to another point he can shoot beams out of his eyes. He gets to, you know what I mean? He's fast. So all of these things are coming out. And once his parents realize, you know what, we have to tell him the truth. We have to tell him who he is. And once he figures it out, hey, I'm actually from a different planet. It's a struggle, and that's one of the things I love. And we're going to talk about how this was actually depicted in a movie, and it came out really well a little later. But he struggled with this, right? I'm human, but I'm not human. I'm alien, but I grew up here. I identify as a human on Earth, but I'm not really human. So he grows up. He knows, and as he's growing up, he's experienced different things. He starts saving people on a regular basis, but his parents tell him to hide it because they tell him, you know, Not everyone is as good as them, right? There are certain people who will not understand and see you like anything, they'll see you as a threat. You might get captured, tortured, or worse. So they tell him, if you're going to actually pursue this, if you're going to try to help people, you have to become something else. You have to figure out a way for these two people to be different. Be Clark Kent and be what? He later became Superman. So why are we talking about Superman today? We're talking about Superman because we are going to get a new Superman in the new DCU. Now, James Gunn, who's actually in charge of DC, is actually writing, directing, and producing Superman Legacy. And I just figured before we do that, how about we just pay homage to Superman and the Supermen that have come before and putting some backstory into this. And paying homage to Superman, we have to go back, especially when we're talking about Superman in movies and in shows. I remember watching the first Superman 1989 with Christopher Reeve. I mean, Christopher Reeve, I think when he took on this role, again, this is always a risk. It's always a risk when you're taking on a role like Superman. And this happened to be one of the first superheroes in movies, right? There are shows before that. But in the movies, he was the first one to actually be depicted on a really, really grand scale. And he took on this role and not only took it on, he made it himself. For the longest time, when you thought about Superman, you pictured Christopher Reeve. That's how good he was. And he embodied that role in two movies that did extremely well, which actually now brought on other really big movies. With Batman following suit. You know what I mean? So all these movies came about because of Superman and Christopher Reeve. So you have to give him homage. And again, I've always said this, you can do very well with good writing, good acting, and good directing. And those movies were done very well, and they were successful, and people loved them. Sorry, actually, that was Christopher Reeve actually did the first movie. I made a mistake. The first movie was in 1978, and the second one was in 1981, and it took a long time to actually go back to the movies. But following Christopher Reeve actually came a show, Lois and Clark. It was a pretty good show, had a few seasons, people loved it. But again, Dean Cain, people see him as Superman, especially growing up. For me, I was growing up in the 90s, and Dean Cain, I loved the show. I really liked it. I think it was well written, and Lois in this show was amazing. You always have this banter with Lois. She's very, very vocal, very strong, very, very opinionated, gets in trouble a lot. But that dynamic with her and Clark always works. So Dean Cain embodied Superman. And that show actually was critically acclaimed, especially the first few seasons, because it was well written. Well written. Now, following that show came Smallville. Smallville for me is one of my favorite shows because we followed a character. This was basically Clark Kent, essentially. And this show, for over 7 seasons, captivated fans, including myself, because you saw Superman grow. You saw him as a teenager, and then ultimately as an adult moving into the adult world. But majority of this show, Smallville, was basically Clark growing up, going from middle school to high school, primary school to high school, right? And dealing with everything kids deal with, going from love to heartache, losing his dad, falling in love, losing in love, falling in love again, all these things that you embody, and learning about your power, knowing how strong you are, knowing what your weakness is, which happens to be kryptonite. Not only that, learning that as you grow, so many people are going to want so much from you, learning how to hold back. You know what I mean? It's actually a pretty, really, really good show. And for a long time, people didn't like how it ended because people thought we would get Superman at the end with a suit flying. But I think the writers always wanted it to remain almost like a really nice, cool show. Not necessarily going so much into Superman, but really just focusing on Clark Kent, right? And his powers showed. You could see him. He did a lot of things in the show where his powers came out and saved people, and he was essentially Superman before Superman. But it was a really cool show, so I'd highly, highly recommend it. And after that came a movie with Brandon Routh that, again, was killed by the critics. I had Didn't like it because, again, like I said before, good writing, good casting, good directing. It failed on all three fronts. Now, again, this is it's not a knock on Brandon Ruth, who actually played Superman again. We'll talk about that later. But unfortunately for him, this was a studio. Warner Brothers was really trying something they didn't really understand. They weren't committed. They didn't understand what it takes to actually embody and find something that works with Superman from a director, from all these things, from casting. So unfortunately, all across the board, it really bombed. And again, you have to fault the studio for doing this, because this is one of those things where a studio realizes or really wants to hit the lottery without understanding, you know what, there are things that have to be set in place. You have to, you know what I mean? If you value this character, if you value this, you have to do it right. Don't rush it. Don't cut corners. Do it right. And they didn't. And they didn't make money. That's Warner Brothers for you. Now, soon after, Brandon Ruth actually played Superman again in the Arrowverse. He played it in multiple shows, from Supergirl to Arrow to The Flash. So he actually embodied Superman again, and he actually looked good. He actually looked good in this role. He was actually, I think Brandon Ruth fits very well with a Superman on TV. I think that's his thing. That's his shtick. He should stay there. And he actually did it really well. And then soon after that, Tyler Hoechlin, who's actually playing the current Superman and in Superman and Lois' current TV show. And for me, I remember watching him in the Arrowverse, and I didn't like it. I honestly didn't like his physique. I didn't like the writing. He came off as cartoonish. So in this show, and he actually got his show, Superman and Lois, I was very skeptical. I didn't understand whether I didn't know whether they would actually do it well. And let me tell you something, boy, was I surprised, because this show is outstanding. And with him, bigger, I think he really embodies Superman on TV. And it's a really cool show. If you haven't watched Superman and Lois, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it, because again, it is well written, and again, well casted. And now we get to my favorite Superman of all time. I'm talking about none other than Henry Cavill. I believe the best casting in not only Superman history, but outside of Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, I mean, who else? Who else embodies a character more than Henry Cavill? Superman. I remember 2012. I remember you hear, when you're a comic fan, there's certain things you try to stay connected, right? And this is 2012. It's not like social media was blowing up like crazy, but you could go online and keep up with stuff. And I remember just trying to research stuff. And I remember the first time I knew Zack Snyder was actually going to be directing Superman. Now, coming after 300, Dawn of the Dead, I knew his work. I didn't know how he would bring a superhero, like a superhero movie. But when I tell you, I remember watching that trailer. I don't know if any of you remember. There was this trailer in the movies in the beginning where, Zach tries to give you hints, doesn't give you a lot in the beginning. He just gives you hints. And I remember in the movie theater seeing this person rocketing up. And I'm like, Superman. And then comes the movie. And the movie is outstanding. Good writing, good casting, good directing. I mean, this movie was this man's attention to detail, Zack Snyder's attention to detail is insane. I mean, I remember seeing the suit, right, up close, and then I'm like, I'm seeing stuff on it. I don't understand what it is. Come to find out, he's incorporated Kryptonian language into the suit. Who does that? You know what I mean? Like, it didn't even look like CGI when Superman flew. It was. And then Henry Cavill, just really bringing this character. It gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because I remember watching Christopher Reeve take on this character, right? And he did an incredible job. But when you watch Henry Cavill as Superman, you can't really see anybody else doing it as good as he did. It is just the truth. And then the fact that he was Superman in Man of Steel, that did incredibly well. He was Superman in Batman versus Superman. I love seeing him badass. A lot of people had different opinions, and you had the critics who were like, Superman is always wholesome. He's supposed to. Zack Snyder's attention to detail, the way he brings out the comics, you could go read comics and realize he's taken this from the comics. He didn't make it up. He didn't decide, you know what, I'm going to mess this up and do something different. No, all of this is from the comics. People are like, in Man of Steel, he killed Zod. Superman has killed before. He has to save people. And he did. And I just remember I remember seeing that movie, and I knew if this man is in charge of DCU, well, the DCEU, and then Batman versus Superman, seeing Batman, seeing how badass Batman was, I was like, and then seeing Wonder Woman. But Henry Cavill, man, we gotta give this man his flowers, man. We gotta pay homage to this man, because I kind of feel like we've been cheated. Warner Brothers basically cheated us from watching this man embody Superman again, because we feel like he should have been able to do multiple standalone movies. He wanted to. The studio just wouldn't allow him to. So I feel like we've been cheated. So this is I guess maybe this is my personal ploy to Warner Brothers and the new DCU with James Gunn. Give us what we want, man. Allow Henry Cavill to leave the right way. Allow Zack Snyder to finish his story. But anyway, Henry Cavill, Superman. There is nothing better than Henry Cavill as Superman. You know it, I know it. And, oh man. Anyway, Henry Cavill, we salute you, man. Best Superman ever. I remember, it's hard to explain it because, you've had different characters within comics. I look at the Joker, right? When you had Jack Nicholson playing the Joker, he did it so well. And you're like, whoever comes after him has to do this. It's like the pressure that you have because he did such an incredible job. And then Heath Ledger, and you're like, wait a minute, this bar keeps going up. And then Joaquin Phoenix, and you're like, dude, movie makes $1 billion from a $50 million budget. Standalone movie. You're like, the bar keeps being raised. And coming from Christopher Reeve and now Henry Cavill, they've clearly raised the bar. And now we get to Superman Legacy. The film coming out, I think it's 2015. And I believe it's going to be James Gunn's first introduction to the new DCU. James Gunn is the head of DCU right now. And he is writing, producing, and directing Superman Legacy. And so, I've seen James Gunn's movies coming from Guardians of the Galaxy. If you've never seen Brightburn's another movie we'll kind of review a little bit later, and then Suicide Squad. So we kind of know how he tends to direct. With Guardians of the Galaxy is more wholesome, more family friendly. With Suicide Squad, I love the fact that he was badass and dark. So I choose to believe that he will do this film justice. And you start with casting. They decided to cast Corin Sweat, and relatively unknown when it comes to big budget movies, but he's a pretty good actor. And one of the cool things is he actually looks like Superman. You know what I mean? When you look at Henry Cavill, you see Superman. When you look at David Corin Sweat, he looks like a young Superman. He really does. So I really think they've done a great job casting. Remember those three elements: good directing, good casting, good writing. So I really believe the fact that it's a couple years away, I think he's really going to work on the writing, the story. I think he's always said that he wants to not only keep certain aspects of DC that's dark, but at the same time bring some, when it comes to Superman, make him a little more wholesome, I think, because this is going to be a very young Superman. So I really feel like he will do well when it comes to writing. I really feel like he'll do well with casting. The only thing is, how about directing? What's the finished product, right? Because when you see Man of Steel, the finished product is outstanding. So we're going to wait and see. My hope is that when we watch this movie, the start of the DCU coming from the DCEU, I really believe and I really hope that he knocks this ball out of the park, because you have no choice. Coming from what DC has been, it's like a tailspin of movies, right? From coming from Wonder Woman 1984, bombing. The Black Adam, disappointment, bombing. The Flash, Shazam. The only good movie that's come out this year was Blue Beetle. Who knew? But he has a lot of pressure, and I think there's a lot for him to really make up for, because the DC fandom right now is very frustrated with Warner Brothers, because they're not allowing us to see what we want to see. So there's so much pressure, but I hope that he comes out with an incredible movie, and that we move into the DCU, and we bring fun back to DC. DC is fun. DC is exciting. Bring the fun back, James. James, bring it back. Now, it obviously goes without saying that Warner Brothers should stay the hell away from DC Studios, right? Warner Brothers needs to step away from DC. I think DC needs to be its own entity, and I kind of wish it actually was, outside of Warner Brothers, because I believe if DC was outside of Warner Brothers, I think we actually wouldn't be having the issues we have right now, because we'd have this continuity, we'd have consistency. So they need to stay the hell away from DC. They need to stay the hell away from these directors. Whatever directors you bring in, I know James Gunn has a plan. From Superman Legacy to Batman Brave and the Bold, or Bold and the Brave. Creature Commandos, there's so many things he wants to do. I think there's Supergirl down the line. So there's so much he wants to do, and I'm pretty sure he's going to bring in directors who he feels can do these movies justice. But the one thing we know, because we have history, is Warner Brothers tends to interfere. And when they do, things just go badly. So my hope is that they stay the hell away from DC. Allow James Gunn to sculpt what he wants to, because we have no choice right now but to trust in his plan, right? We just have no choice but to do that. But there's always a plea from DC. We won't stop saying that we want to see Zack finish his vision. We really want to see him finish his vision. I think James Gunn calls it Elseworlds. These movies are going to be coming out, like the Batman sequel and the Joker sequel. All these movies are Elseworlds, part of DCU, but Elseworlds. Zack Snyder's Justice League can be an Elseworlds product too. So I think we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep pleading for them to actually give us this movie. Because we want to go back to the movies and enjoy DC movies. As a fan base, we want to go watch these movies in the big screen. You know what I mean? Watching Zack Snyder's Justice League on TV was one thing. I loved appreciating it. But if we could have seen it in the movie theaters, I would have paid $30 to watch that movie. So we want to go back to that. We want to see DC go back to what DC was. And DC is fun. DC is entertaining. There's realism in DC. So we want to go back to that. So I can't wait. I really, really can't wait. And I'm glad you guys have been with me on this journey today to talk about not only Superman, but also the coming Superman Legacy movie. So if you love Superman, give me a shout out, a like, subscribe, right? Turn that notification bell. Let's grow this channel. Hopefully by the end of the year, get this channel to over 1,000 subscribers. You can help me do it. Let's go do it. Anyway, you guys have a fantastic rest of your week. Thank you for being with me. I am, as always, the African Comic Guy, signing off. Peace.